right, guys, sweet. Thanks for. You guys are gonna have to bear with me. There is some stuff I'm still getting used to, like I said, in terms of being an online teacher, and just from the mechanics of all this and making it all work so that it is viewable for you guys and it makes sense, and I'm not just wasting your time talking at you and you can't see what I'm talking about. So, guys, if there's something you can't see or something you need me to explain, just please, please, please say that. You know what I mean? Because I'm more than happy to, kind of adjust things as necessary. I was just in stress and I forgot my camera at home, but I do have. Oh, hey, the ZV-E10 is nice. That's a good one. That is a newer mirrorless camera that's come out. I know a lot of like content creators use it, so I think there's going to be a lot of good potential with that camera. Honestly, guys, yeah, like don't. The one thing I will say about photography is like you don't need like a standard camera or a traditional camera to be good at photography anymore, right? There's so many ways for you to be able to pursue and do photography with just like your phone, right? And the things that come along with it that just make it so much easier and simple and straightforward. Because my goal with this class and ultimately for anybody that I work with is just to make it as easy as possible, right? Because I'm a basketball player. That's what I did in in middle school and high school. Not like that's important in the grand scheme of things, but like we're kind of lazy at heart, right? Like I want things to be easy and it's simple for me, right? Ball go and hoop, 2 points, right? That's basically, as a guy, that's how my mind functions sometimes. So when you think about things like photography, I think what holds back a lot of people from being successful with it or having a lot of fun with it is that it can get very complicated. It can be very technical. It can seem kind of daunting in that sense. And that's what I think turns off quite a few people, and I've known quite a few who I would consider really good photographers give up on pursuing it more because of like the technical challenges that they encounter with their gear and also ultimately with like something like editing, So just to wrap up my point, like I want to make this as simple as possible. Like the assignments that I give you, the prompts and all that, they're not complex, right? I want it to be something that's easy for you guys to adapt and be able to use in your work because the less you have to think while you're taking photos, chances are you're gonna have a lot more fun. It's gonna be a lot more entertaining, and you're gonna be able to capture a lot more images that you feel strongly about. Because thumbs up, thumbs down, guys. Who here feels like their work isn't the most interesting, right? Who struggles with finding like capturing work that like speaks to them or anything? Anybody? Right? Right? One couple people, right? I'm not expecting all of you guys to bare your souls to me by any means during this class, but there are we get into ruts just like with anything, right? As people with our work on, especially things that we're developing, if you want to think about the stages of learning, there's like 4 phases essentially. You go through. The first one is like, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know nothing. I know nothing absolutely at all, right? And that's where we all start with anything. That's where we're going to begin at this class, more or less. The second stage is I don't know nothing, but I know what I need to work on, right? So by the end of this class, end of each week, you're going to have goals and assignments that are going to help you understand what it is that you personally can be working on and developing for your photography, right? And then after, ideally, by the end of the class, we're going to translate to I still don't know fully what I'm doing, but I know what I need to work on. And then ultimately, you're going to be, I know what I'm doing a little bit, and I know what I need to work on, right? So we're going to slowly kind of hopefully progress you through those phases so that, depending on what you want to do with photography, like, it's going to all make sense, and it's going to all kind of come together for you guys, And in order for me to really help all of you in the best way possible, you guys have to ask questions. You have to pick my brain. You have to use me, right? Because if you want to put it simply, you guys are paying for my time, right? For the next 4 weeks. Like, you will have my time when I can give it to you, right? And for those that want it, we'll get that time, right? Those that want that help are going to be able to get that extra help, assuming they message me and they reach out to me, and that's fine, right? Because I know everybody has different purposes and reasonings for taking this class. To me, one of the most important things about this class is getting you guys your credit. So you guys can keep staying in the US, keep doing what you're doing, right? Because ultimately that is also what's really important. Right? Like, I love photography. I'm a photographer. I'm going to teach you that, right? But ultimately, that's way more important to me, right? So what is my point with that? That means do your best, right? Just try. And for the love of God, please, do not take pictures of your Stanley Cup. If anybody has a Stanley Cup and I see pictures of it, I'm not going to fail you because that's not what I'm allowed to do. I can't believe I have to make a comment saying, please don't take pictures of your Stanley Cup for some of these assignments. And it's on me for not being like writing him to be like, please put some effort into it and please do things that don't involve your Stanley Cup. Just guys, some of these can be very straightforward. Just put a little bit of effort into it, please. That's all I ask. Like really try your best. Try to be creative when you can. Because some of these are going to be pretty straightforward, and I'm not expecting you guys to be Leonardo da Vinci, or anything, right? I'm expecting you to be yourself, because ultimately by the end of this class, I'm going to impart my knowledge on you as best as I can. But I really want to see your work. I want to see, what drives you guys creatively instead of what you think I might want to see, right? Because, for example, so this is at the end of the class, right, towards the end, I would love to compile all of your guys' work, right, for your portfolio. You're going to need to do it for the assignment anyway. And I want to put it into a gallery like this, right? Can you guys see okay? Right? So I want to compile everybody's work and put it into a gallery like this for you to really see and appreciate what it is that you accomplished, right? Just because like with these classes, especially doing the in-person class, like what I've noticed is that we take a lot of pictures, we compile them, we store them, and then we don't really do anything with them unless maybe we post on social media, whatever it might be. So I think having something like this, especially for you guys to really see and appreciate each other's work, you are going to help inspire each other, right? You are going to help each other develop, especially at the end when we get to critique and peer review, just because like we can only get so good at it by ourselves, right? We can only do so much by ourselves. So ultimately, this is why I say, ask me for help, ask questions, and we can really learn off of each other, okay? So cool. Now that I'm off my soapbox, I'm going to go into my presentation, guys. So guys, this presentation you're going to get this within the next 2 days, right after I get done with editing tomorrow. I'm going to go and post both of my lectures inside Google Classroom. I'm not expecting you guys to write this down verbatim. Just please pay attention, Obviously, if you have questions, stop me and ask questions, right? But other than that, sorry, let me just make sure I'm not missing anybody. Okay. And yeah. Okay, chat, everybody's all good, participants. All right, so going on to this, guys, once again, my name's James. Please call me Jimmy. It's just less formal for me. That's a nice picture of me, fun little quote. Woohoo, I went to UH Manoa. So this class, we're going to we're going to teach you the basics of photography, right? We're going to work on your technical skills, your editing skills, and just your creative potential, regardless of whether you're using, a standard camera or a DSLR or a smartphone, whatever, We're going to have weekly assignments, course learning material. A couple hours of editing per week is my goal, So this is my dog, Violet. This was at her second birthday. We gave her a poncho and a sombrero. Everybody needs to see this photo, so that's why I included it inside my presentation. Guys, I have my email listed here. So I have my office hours listed. Me living in Hawaii, if you're on the East Coast, I'm 6 hours behind you right now. So what does that mean? That means that you guys technically have a decent amount of time to reach out and ask me for questions and help, because I am on a different part of the globe than most of you, right? So I will get back to you as soon as I can. If it is after hours, guys, I will respond probably the next day. I will try to get back to you as soon as possible. I do work a lot here, so forgive me, if I get pulled between everything, but please, if you need something, just don't even hesitate to reach out more than once if you have to, okay? So doing our assignments, guys, a lot of them I would like you guys to do in Google Slides. The reason being is just because it's a lot easier for you to put your work on and then upload it to, Google Classroom, right? It's easier for somehow the things that I ask for on some of these assignments, especially for like before and afters, the way you can break it up, so that should work pretty well. Let me know if you have any problems with that, guys. Sometimes if you can't upload things to Google Slides or whatever it might be, it could be because your Google Drive storage is full. So that's something else to keep on top of, just in case. Do not email me assignments or send them through WhatsApp even and ask me to post them or upload them for you, because in order for me to give you a grade, well, you have to have something uploaded to Google Classroom in order for me to grade, right? Does that make sense? So please just keep it simple. Use photos you've taken, not photos taken of you, right? So this is surprisingly an issue I encounter in most of my classes, just because I'm not very specific with my wording. For this class, this is a photography class, developing your photography. Hence, emphasis on your photography. So please use photos you've taken. If I ask if this photo is of you, please don't take that personally. That's not my point. I'm not gonna, especially not, not being able to work with you guys in person. I'm not gonna know what you all look like. I'm not gonna remember very well after this Zoom call. So if I ask, please just be transparent. And if it's your friend, totally fine. Honestly, like I said, I like working with people, so it makes sense to me, right? And then another thing, like if you can shoot in RAW, if you have that capability, I would recommend it. Basically, if you're not familiar, shooting RAW versus like JPEGs are basically already condensed, edited versions that your camera produces for you. They compress the file. Whereas shooting RAW, it's just the genuine RAW image with all the data so that you have a lot more room to work with. They are going to be substantially larger file sizes. So that is something to keep into account. If you don't have a lot of space on your phone, or if you don't have a big enough memory card, this could be an issue. It's not a requirement for me, but I think if you really are interested in photography, it's gonna help. It's gonna really, really, do a lot for you. Just because like it's just gonna give you so much more to work with, right? Does that make sense? Okay, and then I went over Lightroom Mobile for those that showed up a little bit early, guys. Lightroom Mobile, I recommend it just because it works the best in terms of offering you guys like the best for editing, the editing sliders, how they work. If I don't ask you to pay for the subscription, I don't require that of my students. I will say, if you buy one less coffee or one less vape, depending on what you're into, every month, there's a good chance you could easily afford this app. As a former smoker myself, guys, and someone who drinks a lot more coffee at home, Hawaii is expensive. I get it, right? I'm not, once again, it's not a personal thing. That's just a recommendation. Yeah. And then, okay, so guys, I'm going to go over the agenda for the next 4 weeks of us together. And then after I go through the agenda, I am going to go into my first presentation for the class, right? So I have assignments listed for each week. Just accomplish those hopefully by the end of each week. Please, 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 if you can, please don't wait until the last week of this class to do all of your assignments. Be considerate of not just yourselves, but ultimately me. Because especially I'm going into a busy summer month or just season with wedding work. I don't want to have to cram all of your guys' editing into a few days. I want to give you guys as much critique as I possibly can to help you grow. And in order for me to do that, ideally I have some time. Please give me at least like 2 or 3 days, right? I saw there's a few people that need their certificate before May, which is fine, guys. Early certificates, you have to let me know ahead of time, and especially when you finish your assignments, email me to let me know that you finished so I can get those done. Does that make sense? We're all clear on that, guys? Awesome. Okay, so go to the first week, guys. Learn the basics. Learn the basics, right? The problem, I'm interested in photography, but I don't know what I'm doing. I'm confused. All I have is my phone. My photos suck. Excuse my language, right? I think we all start in a mode like that, or at least I did, right? That's why I say that so candidly, right? And it's just the norm, right? So in order for us to kind of grow with photography, we have to start simple, right? And the easiest way to start is going to be learning our gear, learning our shooting modes, learning the basics of something called the exposure triangle, and then ultimately, also we're going to be learning how to control exposure, right? So, okay, 24 participants, we lost somebody. Guys, and if you see anybody who looks like they need to join the classroom, can you guys just make a comment or just somebody say something to me, please? I'm going to go and continue on with this. Okay, so guys, I'm just going to skim through this. I'm not expecting you guys to read this. So I have the assignments listed inside this presentation to give you an idea of what I'm expecting, right? So we're going to be working around with your camera settings, right? We're going to be working around the idea of exposure, right? When we talk about exposure, that's essentially what cameras are for, right? We expose them to light, right? Because if you've ever tried to take a picture in a dark room or a room with very little or no light, you don't really capture very much of anything, right? That's because we need light to capture our images. And that's why hence the word exposure is used so often inside photography, is because we're talking about the different ways that the different options of exposing our camera to light to capture our image, right? All right, we'll bring her back. Okay, and guys, I have some summaries that I asked for you guys to write. Once again, this is something I didn't think I'd have to mention, but when I'm asking for your summary, your thoughts and feelings on how something went for you, I'm asking you, not what ChatGPT thinks I'm asking, right? Because it doesn't make sense to me for people to use AI to write a response in terms of their work and how they felt, because I could read it and tell you're not talking about the point. You're not talking about your experience, right? And like the fact it's like 100, 200 words. I'm a little surprised that some people, and obviously this isn't directed at you guys. I'm just speaking in general because obviously teachers nowadays, these are things we have to worry about. And I'm obligated by this school to where if I catch you using AI for anything, I have to send it back and tell you to rewrite it. And if you're writing, and if you're using AI to write your reflection about how you felt about something, well, you're kind of cheating yourself out of the experience as well. I don't think 100, 150, 100, 200 words is a lot. I think we can all be like, okay, that is a reasonable amount of writing to do for some of these assignments. So please just don't waste our time, either of our time, because our times are super important, right? I know you guys only have so much free time to do these assignments, right? And obviously, take care of the kids that you're responsible for, but just, you know, keep it easy for all of us. Is that fair, guys? Can I get a thumbs up from all of you that we can agree? Please don't just make us have to do a bunch of extra work with with going through AI. Okay, cool. I appreciate it, guys. I also have some photos in here to kind of be an example. All of these photos that I have in here are photos that I've taken, unless they obviously look like AI photos. Then I created those using AI. Okay, back to the point. First week, guys, technical foundation. Learn your gear, figure out exposure triangle. The second week is when we start to get creative, right? The second week is when we're going to start to implement some of the things that we have been working on. So some problems we encounter then. It's like, okay, I'm taking more photos, but my photos all look the same. What's going on? I don't know what to look for. And the one that I get a lot is like, my photos don't look as good as other people's, right? That is a confidence issue, first off, right? And that is part of the things that we're going to develop in this class because once again, this isn't about what I want to see. This is about me helping you develop your work in your own creative sense to tell whatever it is you want to tell, right? So how do we do that? We're going to learn some basic creative concepts, right? We're going to learn about reading light and how to use it in our environment. Storytelling, which is a huge part about photography, especially for me. And then we're going to go over some types of photography. And then I do that because, well, once again, I'm a portrait photographer. I like working with people. That isn't the same for everybody. Right? You might be into architectural photography. You might be into landscapes, nature, whatever it might be. I think that time is when it's a good opportunity for you to look for and try the different types of photography that speak to you, right? So some of these assignments, I'm going to have you create a cohesive story. Now, when we think about storytelling, guys, like if you have basically the same focal length, the same shot, same look for each image, well, your story is not exactly going to be very dynamic, right? So part of this is challenging you how to get different variety of shots, how to figure out how to make them all work together. And during that process, you're going to realize that you have so many ways to tell a story, to show your work, to create emotion, to anything, right? And it starts with just giving yourself a little bit more variety, right? So we're going to be using the creative concepts to capture some images, which is very straightforward, but very helpful because, we might not be familiar with these concepts or how to apply them, but once you see them often, things are going to start standing out to you pretty more, right? At least that's my goal and my hope, right? So these are some other photos that I've taken on my travels. The top 3 are in the Philippines. The top bottom are in Japan. So, all right, third week, guys. After we figure out how to be creative, after we've learned how to use our cameras, right, to a certain degree, right, we're going to work on improving our images. How do we improve our images? Well, first off, I have so many photos. I don't know what to do with them. Oh my gosh, I'm getting crushed by the weight of my photos. And for reference, guys, I go through thousands of photos a month. Thousands of photos a month. And this isn't a competition. This isn't to be like, oh, look at me, I'm special. No, if you think that the amount of work photos you have to go through is a lot, I'm going to challenge you and say that it's probably not. But that's not my point. It isn't about tick for tat. My point is that, what I want to is help you how to simplify your editing and the photos you go through so that it's way more concise and you're not just wasting your time, right? Because editing, it could be too much work for some people or it doesn't make sense. That's because we haven't learned good systems and processes to go through all of this to make it easier, and just a little bit more, make them a little bit more sense for us guys, okay? So, going on. We're going to go over basics of editing, right? We're going to go over this a lot more tomorrow. Tomorrow is our editing class. We're going to talk about the concept of contrast, color, and then some advanced editing techniques. Yeah. So, right. So we're going to, for the editing assignments, I'm allowing you to use photos you've already taken for that assignment. If you have, just because, I think it'll be a little bit easier to think about our style or developing style while we're editing. If you want to do photos and try them, by all means. I'm just trying to simplify that step for you guys, right? We're gonna take one photo and edit it two different ways. Yeah. So those are just a couple of different assignments for that week, but you guys are gonna be able to just try and challenge and change your editing, right? Okay. So the last week, guys, the final portfolio. This is where, just like that gallery I showed you, bless you, in the beginning, this is where we're going to be able to display our work. This is where everything we've worked on so hard this last couple of weeks, we're going to be able to show it and display it and really, think about what we've accomplished and hopefully, ideally, be proud of the work that we put into this class. So you've learned so much about photography, starting to feel confident. What now? What do we do? Right? So now we are working on that final portfolio. They are all going to be the same images, right? The images you capture for your final portfolio are going to be the same images you're going to be editing and obviously displaying in your portfolio. And those are also the images that we're going to be having up and we're going to be using for critique and review, right? So it'll be 10 photos at that last part, 10 new photos, right? That you are going to use for your portfolio. Use all the different techniques, concepts of photography that we're going to go over, storytelling, whatever it might be, and I just want you. Okay, so I have a brief description here. I'm going to change this, guys, sorry, real quick, so that I get this out of the way. On each image, how? So instead of it being each image, I'm just going to have you write one reflection on your gallery itself, right? See how I just simplified all that work for you guys? You're welcome. Right? Just because it feels kind of silly to make you comment on everyone, right? I think especially if you have a cohesive narrative or story, whatever, behind all of it, that just is going to simplify it, right? So there's capturing the photos, talking about how capturing them went. There's editing the photos, and then also talking about your editing process and what worked, what didn't work well for that, right? So once again, guys, use Google Slides to capture to do your assignments, especially for like the editing one, right? You'll have your before and after images. I want you to, hold on, do I have it in here? No, I don't. I'm gonna add this in real quick. I want you to add screenshots of your editing sliders. I just forgot to add that. So guys, in order for me to help you grow, and figure out what went wrong with your editing, right? I need to see your sliders. I need to see what it is that you did in order for me to help you figure out where you went wrong, right? Because a lot of with photography, like whenever we make mistakes or whenever a photo doesn't work, I'd say 8 times out of 10, if you look at your camera settings, you'll have a pretty good idea on what didn't work and what you can fix, right? Because I've taken thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of bad photos in my life. And my goal is to help you avoid from doing the same, right? So thinking about what worked and what didn't work, especially in terms of our camera settings, is going to teach us a lot, right? So write a small audio statement after the end of everything, right? So this next part, guys, the peer review and constructive feedback. Now, when I did this last class, I kind of assumed everybody was going to get feedback from their fellow students. Not everybody had someone comment on their work. And in light of that, instead of writing a reflection on the feedback you've received, I want you to write, I'd rather you write a little feedback bit about your experience in this class capturing these images, right? So instead of relying on you waiting for people to respond to your work to accomplish the assignment, think about your experience, right? Talk about what worked for you, what didn't work for you as a photographer, in this class, right? Just because, well, ultimately it's going to help me make this class even better for, future students. Sorry, and also just, it's something to keep in mind about what it is that you want to work on. Because I think being aware of what we need to work on, right, is super helpful. Especially if it's something we feel strongly about. Because I can talk till I'm blue in the face about what it is you need to work on, but it might not necessarily resonate that much if it's something you don't, feel strongly about. So you got to listen to yourself. I think listening to yourself, how you feel and how you respond both creatively and anything to your work is important. So ideally, you'll be able to channel that and listen to more of that as this time goes on. Okay, so it is 7:35. Okay, so I got an hour to go for this. Awesome. So guys, I am going to go through this part is going to be my actual presentation now, okay? So, for right now though, is there any questions that anybody has so far about the class stuff? Does it all make sense? We're all good on that. Thumbs up if everybody feels good, right? All right, seeing mostly thumbs up. Cool, awesome, sweet. Cool, guys. I'm gonna go ahead and continue on. Sweet. I gotta get, man. Oh, this person's in Hawaii too. Maria, you're in Hawaii? Wow, look at that. What beach is that? I'm joking. Sorry, guys. I'm probably not the most funny, and it's okay to not laugh at things that I think are funny too. I won't take it personally. All right, so. All right, guys. We're gonna get into learning about photography. This is my presentation for the basics of photography. Now, I already went over this quite a bit, I think, at this point of our time together. Camera phone versus actual phone. Does it matter? What's the big difference? Does anybody care? The honest answer, no, right? There are so many great traditional photographers, phone photographers out there, guys. To think that it has to be one way or the other, I think is an outdated, like way of thinking. So ultimately, we're gonna figure out how to help you learn how to do photography better, whether you're using your camera or your phone. Either one, right? So goals and expectations, guys. We're just trying to work on your foundational skills, trying to get you better, right? One thing I will say here, so just because you have your phones, and we're gonna be shooting, most of you are gonna be shooting on your phones, don't forget that your phone also turns sideways, horizontal. Hold on, let me stop sharing this real quick so you can see this. So guys, most people with phones, we shoot like this, right? Because this is what we're used to, right? Everybody can see me. Don't forget that you can turn your phone horizontal and take landscape orientation photos, right? I have to point that out because it is very easy for us to, I think, skip over that. Because especially if we've learned and developed shooting portrait orientation our whole life, that's what our instinct is going to be, and this is where we're going to subconsciously go to. Especially if you think about what your subject is, like why landscape orientation works really well for landscape. Well, if you think about it, it's a wide scene from left to right, right? So if you capture it from left to right, well, you're going to be able to capture and include more about that scene. Why portrait orientation, up and down, vertical, works really well for people is because if you think about people, well, we're top to bottom, right? We're from up and down. So getting a picture that includes more top to bottom is going to include more of your subject and maybe potentially give you your viewer more to look at, make it more interesting visually, whatever the reasoning might be. Does that make sense? Right? So just don't forget to shoot both, is my point. And also something else that is super, super important, guys, especially for those shooting with their phone, mainly, is to clean your lenses. Clean your lenses. I cannot stress this enough, guys. If I see a streak going through lights in your image, like a smudge, that means that there's something on your lens. And that means it's affecting your quality. It's affecting your contrast because when the light hits your lens, that smudge is not giving you a fully defined, view of your subject because it's messing up with the way the light is affecting it. So it's a super simple thing. It takes 2 seconds to wipe your lens, but I highly recommend doing it, just developing the habit, because especially when we're really excited or we're just hyper focused on whatever we're doing, that is something that we can gloss over and miss completely. So I am gonna go back to this. Okay, sweet, guys. I'm gonna move on. Sweet. Go from here. So guys, I have this broken up into 3 points, right? We have basics of composition, the exposure triangle, and then understandable light, right? Because I think if I wanted to boil down photography into its simplest features, I think those are probably the easiest things to understand and work on as we're going through this class. So the first thing, guys, the exposure triangle. Ironically, it is a triangle, right? It is a combination of 3 things: ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, right? All of those three things combine together to make up the measurements of our exposure. Now, you can see some numbers under ISO, some numbers under shutter speed, some numbers under aperture. My question for you guys is, am I expecting you to understand every single number combination between these 3 things in order for you to get better at photography? The answer? Absolutely yes. I'm joking. No, guys, I'm a photographer. I am not a mathematician. I know numbers, right? I come from restaurants. The most important calculation I ever had to do was what was 20% of a bill. So my point is, guys, you don't need to understand exactly the number measurements, right? you need to understand how they work in relation to each other, right? You need to understand how they work in relation to each other. Just because once you understand how they work together and how it's affecting the image that you're capturing, well, that's how you're going to be able to change the image to make it look how you have in your mind, or just how you can use these to capture a better exposure. Because what I find more often than not is people assume that they need to be shooting in manual to be a photographer, that they need to go straight to manual in order to, develop more as a photographer. Or even, shooting on your phone, you're like, oh, no, this matters because I don't control my camera settings, so I don't know why I need to know it. Your camera on your phone still uses these things to capture images, right? So if you have an image on your phone that is completely blown out or overexposed, meaning too bright, well, you can look at your camera settings and still try to figure out what went wrong. And it's going to be a combination of these three things that are going to help you understand why it happened that way, right? Does anybody have any questions about that so far? Anybody? No? Cool. Nope, don't see anything in the chat. Hey guys, if you have questions, please type it inside the chat for the class so that I can read it and then address to the class. I think that might be easier for me. But yeah, just for that moving forward, okay? So guys, I think going back to my presentation, I think this diagram is the most straightforward and the most direct that I could really, that I found in order to explain how each of them work. Right, so I'm just going to go from top to bottom. The first thing, guys, we're going to talk about is aperture. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. So, guys, when we talk about aperture is the hole in the center of the lens, right? Everybody can see my camera lens that I have right now. So you might not be able to see it well from how this looks, but deep in the center of this lens is a little hole. If you want to compare it to anything, think about it like your eye, the iris of your eye. If anybody's ever gotten their eyes dilated, right, your pupils get huge, and then you have to wear sunglasses and, look like a rock star walking around. That's because when your pupils are huge, if you look at this image on the far right, let me go back to it, right? Sorry, one sec. If you look at, f1.4, and aperture, guys, the way it's written, it's going to be f/the number, right? So here on the right, this is a fast aperture. And the reason being is because when that hole is that big, your camera can take pictures more quickly. So we refer to it as a faster aperture. When we stop it down and we make that hole smaller, your camera takes pictures slower. So hence that's what I'm referred to as a slower aperture, right? This isn't necessarily, it might not think of, it's not like shutter speed, which directly involves, speed. It's just the type of phrasing that we use. Hopefully that makes sense. If you need me to reiterate that, please ask. So going back to this, f1.4, guys. So essentially f1.4, that's a huge, huge hole in your lens, right? And that means that you are letting in so much, as much light as you possibly can in your lighting environment, right? So if you're shooting like in a dark, in a low light situation at night, f1.4 could be super helpful because it's going to pull the most light that's available in your setting that you can to capture an image, right? So the byproduct of that, if you look at the image right above it, what you see is a blurry background behind your subject. Now, as portrait photographers, right, or if you want to think about portrait mode in your camera, essentially what you're getting is that it's called a shallow depth of field, a blurry background, if you want to overly simplify it, right? So your depth of field is what's in focus around your subject. So f1.4, really big hole, really fast aperture, we have a blurry background, assuming we focus on our subject like this. And if we go to the flip side, f32, right, that is a very slow aperture in comparison. Look at what's in focus, right? You have the whole mountain, the whole behind your subject, your person in focus, right? So now, why is this important? Where can we use this? Doing stuff like portraits, right? I like that blurry background because it separates my subject from the background quite nicely, so I can really emphasize focus on the people I'm with. Now, if I'm doing landscape, right? If I'm doing, nature, I might want more in focus. I might want more of that detail of my environment. So that's when I'm probably going to shoot something in more like, I'd probably do like f8 to start, f5.6, and then depending on how that looks, I might go to f32, right? The other difference, it's because at 1.4, your images are going to be very sharp, right? It's going to be like almost like digitally sharp, right? If you've ever used portrait mode on your phone, and you look at the difference of the image when you use when the portrait mode works versus when you use just the regular photo mode, right? You should notice quite a big difference in terms of the separation from the background, especially how the focus captures on your subject, right? Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Yeah, we're all good? Okay, cool. So that's aperture, guys. So let me just, right. So these images right here, they're essentially the same image, right? They're essentially the same image. But if you look at this one on the left, I'm shooting at 1.4. If you look at the one on the right, I'm shooting at f10, right? So it's important to look at these other settings. So this was an overcast day in Japan. I forget where specifically, right? f1.4. My shutter speed is 160th of a second, 1 over 160, and my ISO is 50, right? Pay attention to these settings, guys. It's all going to make sense the further we go on. Right, so I'm focused on this middle bridge right here, and what we see is we have blurry detail here, blurry detail here. We look at this image on the right. I'm shooting at f10, 1/13th of a second, 100. Yes.
Did you change that in the end or during taking this photo?
So this is good question. This is in the moment because I'm using a standard camera. I'm using actually this body specifically, right? Because with our traditional DSLR, our standard cameras, I can't change my focus point and my aperture after the fact. With phones, you can, which to me is mind-blowing, right? Because if you think about what that means and how you can use it, right? Because I have to know my camera settings in order to capture this image, right? In order for me to make it look this way, I need to know what I'm doing with my camera. Your phone? Not so much. Right, now I'm going to get into more of that later. That's a really good question. But that's the things you guys got to pay attention to in terms of what works for what and how to use it to your fullest extent. You see how excited I am? Right? Because that is a superpower. If I could go back and change my aperture after the fact for my regular wedding work, oh my God, I'd be one of the most amazing photographers ever. But I make a lot of mistakes. I can't fix it. So that's something, oh my God, great question. Yeah, we're going to get into that more later, guys. Yeah, like I said, I've taken a lot of bad photos in my life. If I can keep you from doing the same, awesome, right? Getting back to my point, but you see the amount of detail that you're getting in the foreground versus this other image, right? And that's because I have a slower aperture, f10. Now, because I have a slower aperture, my camera can't take photos as fast. I have to have a slower shutter speed, right, to compensate for this slower aperture, right? You see how those are working together, right? And my ISO, which is going to be my camera sensitivity to light, I had to boost that up a little bit, right? Do you see slowly, right? This is going to make way more sense as we go along. Do you see how that's starting to work? All right. So that is aperture. Right. And in here, guys, I have a couple of slides that are going to give you some, good tips on how to use these settings. Right. You'll get this stuff later. I'm just going to kind of skim through it just because I'd rather focus on the material instead of going back to that. Yeah. Okay. That's aperture. Any questions about aperture, guys? Make sense? Mostly?
Makes sense.
Cool. Awesome. So the next thing, guys, we're going to go over is shutter speed, right? So you notice shutter speed was the second that I was just referencing in those series of images. Now, if we look at shutter speed, guys, the easiest way to think about shutter speed is going to involve capturing motion, right? So let's say hypothetically, you guys are responsible for taking care of other people's kids, right? Let's say hypothetically. Let's say that's your job, right? Let's say you want to take pictures of the cute little kids who are running around, right? Do you think you're going to have an easy time capturing a completely in-focus image of that child at half a second? Or are you going to have a better chance of capturing that child in focus at 1/1000th of a second? Right? So if you look at the diagram here, you can see that the faster the shutter speed, the more in focus the movement is going to be. Right? So 1/1000th and over, that's like sports photography, right? That's anything with a lot of movement, a lot of action. But if we go over to the opposite side, anything less than 1/60th of a second, if you aren't completely still while you're holding your camera, even the slightest movement is going to introduce movement blur, right? Let's say your subject is moving very fast and depending on the lighting scenario, you can only get to 1/60th of a second from what your camera says is for the best exposure. And too much movement is going to give motion blur, right? That's not necessarily a bad thing, right? That if you want to insinuate motion, this could be very helpful, right? If you want to freeze motion, it might not be very helpful, right? So it depends on what you're trying to capture and how you want to go about it, right? So going to these pictures right here. So the one on the left is in Japan. The one on the right, I've done a lot of interesting jobs for photography. Quite random at that as well. I was invited to take pictures at a Halloween Wiener Dog Derby. So the first half was it was a costume contest for Halloween with all the Wiener Dogs, which was one of the funniest things I've ever gotten to be a part of. And then they raced them after. They had different heats where they had different groups of dogs race, which also was one of the coolest experiences ever. The money was horrible. I'll never do it again. But so my point is, we look at these dogs here on the right, and they're fast, right? Wiener dogs, they're tiny. They were built for hunting. They are fast dogs. I am literally laying on my stomach in the dirt, right, to capture this image. We look at the dogs, they're in motion, like they're frozen in motion, right? This dog is straight up in the air. Like his feet are not touching the ground, right? But you can still see him in focus for the motion, for the most part, excuse me, right? You get this other dog, get the little tongue hanging out, you get him fully in focus, right? We look at the background, it's not completely in focus, it's not completely out of focus either. There's enough detail in the background to where I can see what's going on, but it doesn't take away from my main focus, which is going to be these two dudes right here, right? We look at my camera settings, I'm at f2.8. That was the fastest aperture that my lens had at the time, so I just left it there because I liked the separation of my subject in the background. Now I'm shooting at 1/1600th of a second. 1/1600th, right? Super fast. And my ISO is at 100 because I left it there. I didn't need extra light. Simple, right? Here on the left, I'm in Japan. This is about like 8 o'clock in the morning. Right? I saw this really nice, the sun coming off the side of this building. I liked the way that it looked. I saw all the cars moving, and if anybody's ever been to Japan, there was always a lot of activity in the city. So I wanted to kind of show that with this image. So I wanted to show the movement blur of the cars, right? You can see if you look into it, most of this is focused. That gentleman right here, there's a little bit of motion blur in his leg, but for the most part, I captured the background in focus, and we have these cars driving through that have motion blur, right? We look at my camera settings. So in order for me to get more in focus in my image, right? And also because I know I'm going to take a slower shutter speed, or I'm going to take a slower image anyway, my aperture is at f14, right? f14, f2.8, right? Everything is more or less in focus here. The one on the right, everything is a nice depth of field behind. My shutter speed is at 1/15th of a second. The one on the right, 1/1600th, 1/15th, right? 1/15th is, I think, agreeably a lot slower than 1/1600th of a second. But because I'm shooting at 1/15th, right, that is going to allow the motion blur of these cars to come through. But I have to be very stable and very sturdy while I'm capturing this image. So I'm going to pull away from that for just a second. So like when I'm taking this image, guys, you see how my arms are braced here in the middle, right? I'm using my body as a way to brace myself. Because if I'm taking it here like this, right, do you see how my hands are kind of moving a little bit? Even that little bit of movement is going to introduce motion blur to the whole image. And that's not what I want. So I'm shooting here. And then I'm just taking pictures. It's like click, 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 click. You know, I'm letting my camera just go instead of like expecting myself to get it on the first try. Because trying something like this, it might be a challenge to get it on the first run. So that's why I'm taking multiple images back and forth. And then I'm going to check after, right? So, and because of that, you know, I'm holding keeping my body stable. I'm able to shoot at 1/15th of a second and have a better time. I also have in-body image stabilization built into my camera. So, you know, I have a little bit more leeway that I can work with, right? So I just something, once again, it comes down to knowing your tools, what you're using, and then how to bring the most out of them. Yeah, cool. Does anybody have any questions about shutter speed? No. Okay, so in here, guys, where is it? Right there. In here, I have a couple of little tidbits about like what are safe parameters for shutter speed. Like anything less than 1/60th of a second might require some extra stability. So just go ahead and reference this later. Right? I'm going to go back to this diagram here. The last thing that I'm going to go over for this part, guys, is going to be your ISO. Right? Your ISO is your camera sensitivity to light. Right? Typically, your cameras are going to start somewhere around 100. Yes, you have a question, Renata?
Could you please share your screen?
Thank you. Right. Okay, we are back here, guys. Everybody can see okay? Thank you.
Yes.
So we are back here, guys. Sorry, like I said, I gotta remember these times to cue and switch things over. So going back to my point, ISO, guys, is just your camera sensitivity to light, right? So typically most cameras, their lowest ISO is going to be 100, right? Mine had the capability of going to 50, but we're starting at 100, right? So if you want to think about this in its simplest form, right? ISO typically doubles, right? If anything in between is a digital effect, so from when it goes to 100 to 200, that means at 200, right, I'm able to get twice as much light out of what's available for me, right? If I go to 400, I can get 4 times as much light out of what's available to me. 8 times, 16 times. You see how that basically doubles up? So remember that when that raises, you're basically doubling, so on and so forth, the amount of light that's available and giving your camera better opportunities to capture that scene with that extra bit of light, right? Because if you want to overly simplify it, you're just raising your camera's sensitivity to light, right? And which can be very helpful, especially if you're shooting in a darker environment, or if you're doing, I got started with concerts, right? My original, introduction to photography was concerts, nightlifes, clubs, raves, the whole thing. So I was molded in the dark, essentially. I'm like Bane from Batman, except almost as muscular, right? Anybody who's seen Batman? Sorry guys, I make fun of myself a lot. You don't have to laugh. I understand. But my point is, so guys, like I'm used to shooting in these darker environments because that's what I started in. It might be hard to understand at first, especially if you're just trying to use these first two options, aperture and shutter speed. Because let's say you're in a dark room, or if it's sunset, you're at ISO 100, your shutter speed is at 500, and you're shooting at f16, right? Do you think you're going to be able to capture a nice image at night with ISO 100, shutter speed 1/500, aperture f16? I'm going to assume not, right? Because like to f16, you see how much smaller this hole is versus f2.8, right? You need a lot more light when you're going to these darker lighting environments, right? So one other way you could do that, right? You could slow your shutter speed down, because when you slow your shutter speed down, it's not just about motion, it's about how much light you're letting into the camera, right? So when you have your shutter open at 1/60th of a second, right? So it's basically like click, right? Half a second would be click, right? It's like that extra delay of time is how long the shutter stays open. So if there's less light in your environment, you're gonna want a slower shutter speed, right? To let in more of that light, and or you're also gonna want to raise your ISO. Does that make sense? How those work together, right? So it's gonna be up to you, and just, and you're gonna get better with this with experience on being able to decide which one I need to raise first. Chances are you're gonna mess with the aperture and shutter speed first. ISO would be the last thing that you're gonna have to change consistently, just because it is gonna have the least amount of effect of quality on your image unless you get higher up, right? Because if you look into these pictures, you see all the little dots in there? That's what's called noise, digital noise, not to be confused with film grain. Film grain is a added effect to your images to give it that old school film look. Digital noise is imperfections in your camera and your image, because you're essentially asking like, hey, get as much light as you can from this scenario, but your camera's like, I can only do so much. Sorry, there's these little dots here. That's about as much as I can give you. And there are ways for us to clean these images up if we have noise to a certain degree. But if you look at ISO 800, right, and then you look at ISO 25600, well, that's a substantial difference, not in just the number, but also in the noise that's there, right? Guys, the amount of times that I've shot at ISO 25600 is less than 5. And I've already told you how much I shoot for photography. My point is not that you'll never use this. If you do things like maybe astrophotography, that could be something you use it for. But my point is, realistically, I'm not going higher than 3200 ever. And my camera, I think I can assume, is a little bit of a better quality than what most of you guys are using. So just try to keep that in mind, right? Try not to overdo it, because, and this is why I'm going to try to get you guys away from shooting in your auto modes for those that have standard cameras, because it might instead of changing your shutter speed or your aperture, right, it might raise your ISO instead to keep the other settings, which isn't necessarily a wrong thing. But if you're shooting in what I would consider decent lighting and it jumps to ISO 6400, well, that's not necessary, first off, and you're basically losing a lot of quality just to keep those camera settings, right? This is where you have to kind of take control and take over and just know what you're getting out of your camera, right? Does that make sense, guys? Anybody have any questions about ISO, anything, right? Okay, so going to the sample images, right? So the one on the left, this is middle of the day, right? This is in Korea, Seoul, Korea. Oh my goodness. I know it's in the middle of I would say early morning, right? It's a hazy, overcast day, but just from looking at this, guys, you can tell there's a lot of light, a lot of white light, right? Especially because it's getting diffused through the clouds. I liked 1.4, I left it there, right? Just because I like the look. Shutter speed, 1/4000th of a second, right? And my ISO is at 50. So I'm outside, I know it's super bright, and I actually was like, okay, I want half as much light versus ISO 100. So I went from ISO 100 to ISO 50. If this was ISO 100, my shutter speed would be 1/8,000th of a second, which my camera is capable of, right? But I don't, that's about as max as I can go. And when you're hitting your max settings for what your camera is able to go to, right, you're only gonna be able to capture so much of the image itself, right? If I could not get my shutter speed in order, right, or compensate, then the brighter parts of my image might not come out well, right? So I have a tendency to take things a little bit darker just because I know I'm gonna be bringing them up in Photoshop after, right? That's just what I'm looking for, right? So here, ISO 50, the one on the right, ISO 2000. ISO 2000, right? This one on the right, I was in Japan. It's essentially this huge, it was a cave carved into the side of the mountain, right? And they had all these really cool like little idols and effigies about Buddha and everything. So my light in this picture is a candle on a wall, right? So we're gonna compare the candle light versus the light of the sun in outdoors, right? Oh shoot. Obviously the candle is not nearly gonna be as bright as the sun on the left image. So we look at our ISO 2000. I cranked that thing up. I cranked it up. And because my camera, I'm able to like choose ISOs between the double number is, it's a digital thing. I'm able to have that kind of control, right? And then we look at my shutter speed, 1/80th of a second versus 1/4000th, right? So guys, does all that make sense a little bit more now? ISO, shutter speed, aperture, how they work in relation. Does anybody want me to kind of explain that a little bit more or go in more depth about that? Give me just thumbs up if everybody's all good. Do you have a question, Renata? Sorry. Good? Okay, cool. Everybody's all good. Thumbs up. Sweet. I just see somebody sealing in one of them. It's cool. Awesome, guys. Cool. I am going to... Hold on, I think I forgot to wait. Oh, wait. Okay. So, summary, guys. Those things together are super important for photography. They are going to help you understand what happened with your photos, how to capture them better, what you can work on, right? So, besides that, we're going to go into... Well, before I go into basics of composition, guys, that is basically the gist of how like exposure and everything works. What I want right now, actually, guys, is I want all of us to pull out for most of us, you're using your phones to be on this call, right? So I can't ask you to use your phones. Instead, I'm going to pull up my phone and I'm going to show you guys a couple of things that you can do in terms of shooting that is going to make your life easier, right? Because typically what I would do is I would go over the basics of composition, understanding light, all that stuff is super important, right? But I'm gonna go through that rather quickly before the class wraps up here in about 20 minutes. What I'm gonna actually do instead is I'm gonna show you how to use your phone camera and your cameras better first, right? So I will have this stuff inside the Google Classroom, guys. You can look at it later, right? I have especially for the basics of composition, when you get to that assignment inside for the class, I have a separate PDF including the basics of composition that you can refer to, okay? So I'm just gonna go over a couple of things in terms of shooting with both your phone and your cameras right now. So the first things first, guys, for those that are using your standard cameras, I'm gonna do this first because I think it's gonna be easier. So most cameras, guys, you're gonna have, right, a list of dials like this. Everybody can see what I'm putting in the camera. You see this little thing here. You see all these different letters. You see some of them of your guys is gonna have pictures, right? They're gonna have the landscape option, the portrait option, fine and dandy, right? Forget about those. You really only need to remember a few shooting modes that I would love for you guys to stick to and adhere to moving forward. You should see an M. Let me move my face out of there. You should see an M. My camera, you should see an AV, and then you should see a TV, right? If you're shooting on other cameras like Nikon or Sony, right, it's going to be M, A, and then S, right? So I'll take a better picture of this, guys, and I'll send it to you later. But essentially, those are your main shooting modes for your camera, right? M translates to manual. A translates to aperture. AV for Canon is aperture value. S, shutter speed. Or for Canon, because Canon just has to be different, TV translates to time value, which is your shutter speed. Which, why they couldn't have just made it the same, I don't know. And it's super frustrating to me. It just gets irritating, right? But my point is, guys, those main camera setting modes are gonna give you a lot more control over your image. For reference, guys, do you want to know how often I shoot in manual in my professional career nowadays? Not very often. Not very often. And the reason being is because with my style of photography, right, I overshoot, meaning I capture a lot more images than I might need to, just because I'm always looking for specific moments. So rather than being on manual and like, okay, I gotta constantly be aware of what I'm changing everything so it works, I'm actually shooting on what's called AV or aperture priority, right? The reason being is because when I set my aperture, my camera is gonna automatically set the shutter speed, right? My ISO I control manually too, right? But my ISO, like if I'm out in the middle of the day and it's sunny like it is right now, I'm at ISO 100. If I'm shooting at night or in a lower, environment, ISO 800, right? I know when I'm in those different environments, I'm going to be okay here or there, right? And then I'll fluctuate in between as I need. But with my aperture, if I leave it at, 2.8, right? Everything I'm going to be shooting at is going to be at aperture 2.8, and the shutter speed is going to fluctuate, right? So that way I have one less thing to think about. And instead of thinking about all those other settings, because I'm already familiar with them, I'm able to shoot faster and make it work better for me, right? And that's because, like, with my lenses, right, I have they're not variable aperture lenses, meaning that when I zoom out, right, it's going to still be at 2.8, and when I zoom in, it's still going to be at 2.8. For those of you that have standard cameras, chances are what you have is called a variable aperture lens, meaning that, and if you look at, on your lenses, you should see like some numbers. I don't know, you can't really see that well. Some numbers around the rim somewhere, and there's always going to be a point where it tells you your aperture. If it says like f3, if it says 3.5-5.6, what that means is that when you're at your widest lens, right? When you're at your widest, your fastest aperture you can get is like 3.5. But when you zoom in, it's automatically going to raise your aperture. It's going to slow your aperture down to 5.6. So if you aren't aware that's happening, when you zoom in, you're going to need 2 to 3 times as much light as you did when you didn't zoom in, right? And that can be very confusing. So instead of being confused, well, use aperture priority, right? And that should ideally work a little bit better. It should work a lot more fluid, is how I feel, right? If that doesn't work, then try shutter speed priority, right? And then try to set your shutter speed to like maybe 1/60th of a second or 1/100th, and then walk around and try that. So that way, instead of like, you thinking about the aperture, your camera's like, okay, hey, it's shutter speed is staying this way. I'm going to set the aperture now. The ISO is going to stay the same unless I put it on auto, right? And then you see how we can use that to make it easier for us to shoot. Because what's more important to me, guys, is that you capture the image correctly. Meaning like you capture the highlights, you got the shadow detail, all that is good, hypothetically. And then that's what you're going to be able to work more with when you get to the editing portion of your work, right? Because you're only going to be able to capture so perfect, so good of an image in your camera, right? It's like 20%. 80% of it is captured in camera, right? The last 20% of making it completely yours, right, is going to be done through editing, right? So just because some of the images we take are a little bit dark, a little bit bright, that doesn't mean give up on it. That means that let's wait till we can open it up in post and edit and see what we can do with it, right? Does that make sense? So that would be the easiest way that I would shoot with these cameras, right? Standard cameras. Now, guys, going along with phones, it's even easier. You have so much less to think about, and that is so cool. That is honestly so cool, right? And then now we just got to figure out how to channel that and use it to our fullest extent. The first things first, guys, does everybody have the grid display turned on their phone? Grid display, everybody know what I'm talking about? Okay, so guys, if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, what I want you to do, well, after this, because some of you are using your phone for the Zoom call, right? Go to your camera settings, look up grid display, and you should have it on. You should get those lines in your photo, right? Because that's gonna be your rule of thirds. That's gonna be what's gonna help you balance your images in your composition, right? Super helpful. You wanna have that turned on because our eyes only work so well. And for a lot of people, we have not straight horizon lines. If I look at your image and I gotta go like this to see your image correctly, well, that means we could probably straighten out our horizon line and make it easier for our viewer, right? And having those grid lines is gonna be super helpful, right? So the other thing, on top, there's this little arrow, right? Now, wait, first off, is there anybody that's using a Samsung or other type of phone? You have a Samsung? Okay, is there anybody using a Pixel? Is it all just, anybody? Nobody? Okay. So everybody's using mostly an iPhone. We have one Samsung person, right? Okay, wait, do you have something else? Okay, cool guys. So with Samsung, it's a little bit different. What I'm about to show is called the exposure compensation. In Samsung, it's going to be listed under EV. If you go to Pro Mode and see your Samsung phone, you're going to see what's called EV. That's your exposure value. It's the same thing. So guys, you're familiar with when you tap the screen, there's that little sun that pops up, and then you can make it darker, you make it brighter, which is helpful. But do you notice that when you change and move, if you didn't lock it, it goes back to how it was before? Isn't that kind of frustrating sometimes? You're like, damn it, I just want you to stay at this exposure so I can capture these images. If only there was an easier way to do that. Guess what? There is. In here, you should see a circle, right, with a plus or minus in it. Everybody see that? The circle with a plus or minus? So that's called your exposure compensation, guys. If you click on it, you should see a slider come up, right, where you can make your image darker, make your image brighter, right? So darker, brighter, right? You guys see that mostly right there? So guys, you can set this and leave it and it'll stay there, right? Me, I always have mine set at -0.3 because I always feel like my iPhone photos are too bright when it captures it anyway, and I like to do more with the highlights. So I have that turned down a little bit, right? Let's say you end up in a darker room, right? You need more light. Well, you can make that image brighter just doing that. So you cannot control your specific settings per se, right? Like you would with a standard camera, but this is how you are able to control how you capture your exposure in your phone. Super helpful, super like, it just gives you way more control. That is something that I hope you guys are gonna be using religiously for this class, yeah? So going back to that, going up there, that is the major one thing that I want to use, I would recommend using there, guys. The other thing, especially for those using phones, guys, try not to shoot every photo as a live photo. When you shoot it as a live photo, your quality is going to be a little bit lower, right? Because instead of using the full image, you're basically using Apple's type of file, right? And you get just a lower quality image. Do you recommend using the contrast tool on the iPhone camera? Not necessarily. I don't recommend using the contrast tool on the iPhone camera just because all of that I would rather you do in editing. And you're gonna have way more control with it in editing because iPhone, especially, they do that auto HDR thing to your images. And my phone, I'm not able to turn it off. Majority of our phones, I don't think we are able to. And it kills me every time because what it's doing is it's basically editing your image for you. And then when you get your image, you're trying to edit on something that's already been edited. So hypothetically, there's only so much you can do on top of that, right? So that's why it's all about giving you the best quality image to work with. Don't shoot it on live photo at all times, right? We want to make sure to turn that off. My phone, I have the RAW capability right there, right? So, let me try to do that. So I can turn on RAW if I want, which would give me a bigger size image. Once again, that takes up a lot of space, guys. That's up to you if that's something that you want to work with. I recommend it if you are into photography and you want to see how much you can really do with, your work, right? There is that. Okay, and then, so pull that down. So that's kind of my major one for photo. Guys, going into portrait mode. So portrait mode, let me ask you guys a question. Is portrait mode only for pictures of people? No, especially because you can change the aperture after the fact. Like, think about that, right? When we hear portrait, we assume, okay, portraits of people, right? And when we think about filling our frame with this singular thing, people are like, oh, that's macro. Not necessarily, right? There's a big difference between like a macro photo and then filling your frame with your subject. They are technically the same in a sense, right? But filling your frame doesn't necessarily have to be a macro photo, right? And if you use portrait mode on your phone and you're taking a picture of an individual subject, you might be surprised at how much focus you can bring and put on that subject, right? Just by using portrait mode. And once again, the fact that you can change it after the fact is insane to me, right? Let me just take a picture. I'm gonna be able to show it to you guys through this, sorry. I need to figure out a better way to show you ideally what I'm doing on my phone, the screen. I haven't perfected that just yet, but do you guys get my point? Does it make sense, right? That's something I would love to see you guys do during this class and do more with. Because like if you shoot in the regular photo app the whole time in your phone, it'll work, right? You'll be able to capture, images and you'll be able to capture a lot of them, but you might not necessarily have the most variety with your work because it's all gonna basically be the same, So another thing real quickly, guys, remember I told you if we did something wrong with our photos and they don't look good, right? We should be able to look at what the photo was shot at, right? So I am going to pull up a photo of my dog because my dog, besides my girlfriend, is one of the most important things to me in my life. So if you look underneath, guys, there's that eye, right? Sorry about the reflection. So when you push the eye underneath, right, what you should get underneath are a bunch of camera settings, right? So if you look at those camera settings, what you should see is ISO, you should see your aperture and you should see your shutter speed, right? So what does that tell you? It tells you that your camera settings are in there, right? And if something isn't in focus, if something didn't work, that's where we can go to figure out what we need to fix, right? And the other thing about phones, guys, so this was shot at 1/35 of a second, right? 135. Remember what I was saying about being still and not moving, and because that is very true and it's still super important. You have in-body image stabilization built into your phones, and they're pretty good for the most part, right? So you are able to capture steadier photos in darker environments a little bit easier with your phone. Once again, superpower, right? Using night mode on your camera, it's not just for if it's only at night. If you're in a darker space and you use your night mode to have it capture a little bit of longer exposure, right? And you're able to keep it steady because your camera is able to keep itself steady, your phone, right? Do you see the power in that? Do you see how that's going to give you so much more room to work with, right? And okay, so there is that. Just keeping on with portrait mode, guys, real fast. Has anybody ever had a problem trying to use portrait mode and you don't get that effect behind the people, right? So there's what's called a minimum and maximum focal distance, meaning that in order for portrait mode to work, especially because it's a digital effect on our phone, right, we have to get close enough to our subject where it'll lock on and then it'll create the blurry background, right? Because if we're too far away, everything is going to be in focus. Everything is going to be in focus because when you back up far enough, the aperture effect isn't going to work as well. Even if I was shooting at 1.4 on my camera and I'm too far back, everything is going to look really sharp, but everything is going to be in focus. Unless I get even closer to my subject and then it locks onto them and then I get the effect, right? And the fact that I can take the picture, right? And then I open it to edit, depending, as long as I did it correctly, I didn't in this one, okay, right? I can change my focus point after, I can change how intense the aperture is. In terms of your creative potential, do you see how much more you can do with that? Does that make sense, right? Everybody feel cool about that, that's using their phone? You're like, yeah, I'm excited to use my phone now because it's so much easier and I gotta think less, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's all about knowing the tools that you have and how to get the most out of them, right? And that's why a lot of what I've taught nowadays revolves around phones. But for cameras, all this stuff still very much applies. We just don't have as much leeway to, correct things after the fact. We have to be a lot more precise. And those that do have standard cameras, guys, if you really want more of content focused around that, you have to ask me. I'm more than happy to create learning material for you guys. I have been. If you've noticed some of the assignments that got posted, you got me doing my very first YouTube videos for this class, which I'm really stoked about. But I'm so happy to create and give you guys more learning material because I always feel like no matter how much I explain to you, I can never give you enough in the time that we have. And that's me, being me, because I have so much knowledge and stuff I want to give you guys, but there's so much to learn. And I'm not expecting you guys to be full-fledged, self-reliant photographers by the end of this class. My goal is hopefully to teach you how to use whatever you're using to take photos just a little bit better, right? And in that process, you're going to be able to take better photos for yourself, right? Okay, I got about 7 minutes. Okay, I'll try to wrap this up instead of getting too caught up. Okay, yeah, guys, I just really wanted to go over the phone stuff. Oh, one last point on the phone things real quick. So guys, when you are taking pictures on your phone, right, try not to zoom in between the lenses. If you have a 1x, a 2x, shoot at the 1x, shoot at the 2x. Don't shoot at 1.5, don't shoot at 2 point whatever, anything after, right? The reason being is because there's a difference between what's called a optical zoom and a digital zoom, right? So optical zoom, right? If I had this lens attached to my camera, that means that when I'm wide as can be, I'm using my full sensor. When I zoom in, I'm still using my full sensor for my camera, meaning the quality of the image is roughly going to be the same, right? For your phones, anything in between the lens itself, my camera has the 1x, the 2x, the 3x. If I'm using the 1, 2, or the 3, I'm getting the full use of my sensor. When I go to 1.5, what happens is my camera is closing in on the sensor, so you're getting less of the sensor. Okay, we're zoomed in here. So instead of using your whole sensor, I'm using just this part to capture the image. Does that make sense? And because of that, I'm losing a lot of the quality potential of my image because I'm only using, let's say, 60% of my camera sensor, 50%. These are just rough guesstimations, right? I don't know the exact numbers. But do you see how at that point you're losing quite a bit of the quality in your work? right? So I would ask that you preferably, stay at the 1 time 2 and the 3, whatever, stay at those full focal lengths. But obviously there's some times, guys, where you're gonna have to, dip, change it as you need. That's okay. I would say first try it with the full length of those focal length of those lenses, and then just crop in, guys, because cropping is, you're all gonna hear that from me. This could be cropped in more. You should crop in here. If I draw on your work, you're gonna see it's always gonna be cropping. Cropping is where I would start with everything, guys. If you have a problem with your work, you're not sure what to do with it, play around with the crop first. And most importantly, use the original crop ratio, meaning do not change don't do freeform crops. Don't do freeform crops because it's not gonna help you, right? Freeform crops are not gonna help you. They are just gonna when you put your photos side by side, they're not gonna look the same, and it's gonna be weird, and it's gonna take you out of it, right? It's not gonna help you develop, in my opinion. So just something to keep in mind. Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna post this presentation after this instead, because I'm not really gonna have time to go through the basics of composition and stuff like that, guys. This is things that you guys are gonna have time to go over. I'm just gonna put my screen up so you can just look at it real quick. This is stuff that you guys are gonna have more than enough time to go over yourself, right? It's very straightforward. I have a couple of examples in here for each, right? But if you just look at it and you read the little bit that I have for these, it should hopefully make sense, right? So this is stuff that you're not gonna have to get to just yet. This is something that you're gonna get to at week 2, right? I have all these sample photos and things, right? Just for you guys to look at and think about why they worked. I hope that, moving forward, when you look at photos that other people took, you're gonna be able to see and kind of understand how they were able to capture those images, right? Because you're gonna have a better understanding of how they worked in the first place, right? So instead of going through that now, I'm gonna leave that up to you guys to go over yourself, just because I am running out of time here. Your time is very important to me, guys. I don't necessarily want to keep you too long. But right now, though, I just want to ask, do we have any questions about anything we've gone over today? Is there something that I didn't go over that might help a little bit better for anybody? Anybody? All right. If you guys are all good, let me see some thumbs ups, guys, so I can scroll through and make sure we are all good. That way I don't forget anybody. Okay, yep, she did the thumbs up there. Thumbs up, thumbs up. Sweet. Cool. Awesome. Everybody looks pretty good. Okay. All right, guys. So I'm going to go ahead and then wrap it up here, because I think that we've gone over a decent amount. We've gone over the layout for the class. Tomorrow is going to be our editing lecture, right? I might squeeze in some of the stuff that I didn't go over today with the basics of composition and, the natural light stuff. But that stuff, guys, that as this class progresses with the material that I've given you, I'm hoping and assuming that you're going to be able to learn and develop that as it goes along. I really just wanted to give you better ways to shoot at this point, because instead of just talking at you this whole time, normally I try to engage with my class and get you guys to do it yourself, but obviously there's only so much I can do with us being an online class, and most of you using your phone just to be on this Zoom call, right, which is not a problem. So yeah, guys, just want to say thank you guys for taking the class. You are my second online class ever, so I really appreciate you guys signing up and taking this. I am always, I'm all about trying to figure out how to make things more efficient, guys, and make things better. So, if there's things that, I do or say that didn't really work for you, or there's something you would like better explained, please just let me know. At the end, I would love a small reflection from you guys in a comment. I'll add an extra assignment at that point for you guys to give me your feedback. Please be honest, because once again, you guys are paying for my time. You guys are paying for this class, and that is important to me, right? Especially with the work you guys do and how much you guys work. I want to make sure that you get as much out of this class as you can for me, just because that's what I like to do. I like to help my students, and I like to make sure that, they get all the resources from me. I have a student who took my first one. She's doing headshots for some corporate company and reached out to me for help, and I was able to give her a whole slew of things that are going to help make that experience better for her. So even after this class wraps up, guys, please don't hesitate to reach out to me for photography help, because I love helping people. I really do, and it's been a newfound passion of mine over the last couple of years to be a teacher. So if you feel like you aren't getting enough information out of me, get more information out of me, right? I'm not shy, if you can't tell, right? I'm not exactly reserved. So I want to give you guys that time and attention, okay? But yeah, getting off my soap opera. Guys, we feel good about today. Everybody's all good. No other questions. Nobody wrote anything in the chat. No complaints so far, right? Cool, guys. Awesome. Thank you all for showing up today. That wraps up our time. We are just, exactly an hour and a half. Cool. So guys, tomorrow is going to be the same time. Tomorrow we are going to be going over editing. Please download Lightroom Mobile. If you haven't, please just use the free one. Just because I'm not asking you guys to pay for the app necessarily, right? And then we're going to go through that hopefully as easy as possible. I have a screen recording of this presentation that I'm going to upload as well for if anybody wants to go back and listen to and look at the stuff that we went over. But it is just going to be me talking. It's not going to be me having me on the camera. Okay? Guys, we all good? We're all good?
Yes, thank you.
Of course, guys. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys tomorrow morning. Bye, guys. Take care. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.